Today's topic is secret of psychotherapy, the inner child. Destructive behavior takes various forms, from subtle self sabotage and self defeating patterns to passive hostility to severe self destructive symptoms, violent aggression, and sometimes evil deeds. Commonly, destructive behavior in adults bears the impetuous, impulsive quality of childish petulance of narcissistic temper tantrums. So, in order to understand what this inner child is, let us begin with the inner child is real, not literally nor physically, but figuratively, metaphorically, this is real. It is like complexes in general, a psychological or phenomenological reality, and an extraordinary powerful one at that. Indeed, most mental disorders and destructive behavior patterns are more or less related to this unconscious part of ourselves. We were all once children and still have that child dwelling within us. But most adults are quite unaware of this. And this lack of conscious relatedness to our own inner child is precisely where so many behavioral, emotional, and relationship difficulties stem from. The fact is that the majority of the so called adults are not truly adults at all. We all get older. Anyone with a little luck can do that. But psychologically speaking, this is not adulthood. True adulthood hinges on acknowledging, accepting, and taking responsibility for loving and parenting one's own inner child. For most adults, this never happens. Instead, their inner child has been denied, neglected, disparaged, abandoned, or rejected. We're told by society to grow up putting childish things aside to become adults. We have been taught that our inner child, representing our childlike capacity for innocence, wonder, awe, joy, sensitivity, and playfulness, must be stifled, quarantined, or even killed. So the inner child comprises and potentiates these positive qualities, but it also holds our accumulated childhood hurts, traumas, fears, and angers. Grown ups are convinced they have successfully outgrown, jettisoned, and left this child and its emotional baggage long behind. But this is far from the truth. In fact, these so called grown ups or adults are unwillingly being constantly influenced or covertly controlled by this unconscious inner child. For many, it is not an adult self directing their lives, but rather an emotionally wounded inner child inhabiting an adult body, a 5-year old running around in a 40-year-old frame. So this is kind of such situation. It is a hurt, angry, fearful little boy or girl calling the shots, making adult decisions, a boy or girl being sent out into the world to a man's or woman's job, a 5 or 10-year old or two of any of the two trying to engage in grown up relationship. Can a child have a mature relationship, a career, an independent life? Yet that is precisely what is happening with us all every day to some degree or another. And then we wonder why our relationship fall apart, why we feel so anxious, afraid, insecure, inferior, small, lost, lonely. But think but think about it. How else would any child feel having to fend for themselves in an apparently adult world without proper parental supervision, protection, structure, or support? This is confusing state of affairs we so frequently see in seekers of psychotherapy. It is not dissociative identity disorder, as we call it in a multiple personality, but rather a far from common, pervasive, and insidious sort of socially sanctioned dissociation. But if we can recognize this problem for what it is, we can begin dealing with it by choosing to become psychological, not just chronological adults. How is this accomplished? First, one becomes conscious of his or her own inner child. Remaining unconscious is what empowers the dissociated inner child to take possession of the personality at times. To overpower the will of the adult, next we learn to take our inner child seriously and to consciously communicate with that little girl or boy within, to listen to how he or she feels and what he or she needs from us here and now. The often frustrated primal needs of that perennial inner child for love, acceptance, protection, nurturance, understanding remain the same today as when we were children. As pseudo adults, we futilely attempt to force another into fulfilling these infantile needs for us. But this is doomed to failure. What we didn't sufficiently receive in the past from our parents as children must be confronted in the present, painful though it may be. The past trauma, sadness, disappointments, and depression cannot be changed and must be accepted. Becoming an adult means swallowing this bitter pill, as I call it, that unfortunately for most of us, certain infantile needs were maliciously or not unmet by our imperfect parents or caretakers, and they never will be, no matter how good or smart or attractive or spiritual or loving we become. Those days are over. What was done cannot be undone. We should not, as adults now, expect others to meet all of these unfulfilled childhood needs. They cannot. Authentic adulthood requires both accepting the painful past and the primary responsibility for taking care of that inner child's needs for being a good enough parent to him or her now and in the future. At least in sort of psychotherapy I practice, the adult part of personality learns, and this, like much of the therapy, is a learning process to relate to the inner child exactly as a good parent relates to a flesh and blood child, providing discipline, limits, boundaries, and structure. These are all, along with support, nurturance, and acceptance, indispensable elements of loving and living with any child, whether metaphorically or actual. By initiating and maintaining an ongoing dialogue between the two, a reconciliation between inner child and mature adult can be reached. A new mutually beneficial cooperative symbolic relationship can be created in which sometimes conflicting needs of both the adult self and inner child can be creatively satisfied. So this is a very good perspective on managing inner child, because you need to satisfy the inner child very seriously, because if the inner child is not set gratified, you may not, never feel you may never feel happy. So thank you very much. So this is Dr. Sachitra from Transilience Learning and Development. We conduct series of webinars, series of podcasts and workshops across India, across the globe. Thank you very much.